It really is my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Bill Gibson and everything you want to know about cochlear implants. Emeritus Professor Bill Gibson, AOENT, is renowned as an ear, nose and throat surgeon and world leader in cochlear implantation and Meniere's disease. He's performed over 2,000 cochlear implant surgeries. I'm thrilled to be able to say that I've known him for 30 years because I was associated with one of those implants on a 4-year-old. Professor Gibson was one of the pioneers of cochlear implantation worldwide, and he was the first professor of ontology, ear surgery at the University of Sydney. Professor Gibson is now retired from the university, but continues his clinical practice as a semi-retired ear specialist. Professor Gibson passionately believes cochlear implants are the best form of intervention for all people with hearing loss, particularly for children who are born with profound hearing loss. In 1984, he was instrumental in the establishment of a cochlear implant program that became NextSense Cochlear Implant Services. Under Professor Gibson's direction, NextSense has performed more than 4,500 cochlear implant surgeries and is one of the largest programs in the world. It is regarded as a world leader in the provision of cochlear implants and related services. Thank you, Professor Gibson. Over to you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. I was given this title, Everything You Wanted to Know About Cochlear Implants. That would be impossible, I guess, but I just thought I would split it up to how it all began, what's happening now, and what's going to happen in the future. Next slide. In the beginning, cochlear implants began 65 years ago in France. There was an engineer called Journo, and there was a surgeon called Emeritus. And they did the first cochlear implant on the 25th of June, 1957. And it was fantastic. They managed to put a copper wire into this man's ear who had had mastoid surgery, and he found it a great benefit. He couldn't hear all the words, but he could hear something. There was a surgeon called William House in Los Angeles, and he was fascinated by this. And 4 years later, he and a colleague called Doyle did the first cochlear implants in Los Angeles. And this was followed by a number of people. But the general belief was that cochlear implants could be dangerous. So that the intracochlear electrodes could destroy the cochlear nerve and leave children or adults without any natural hearing. That the cochlear implants could never replace the complex inner ear mechanism and never give the ability to distinguish speech. And then House himself said that if several electrodes were inserted into the ear, they all gave the same result. So there was no need to use more than one electrode. Ingeborg and Edwin Hochmeyer, who founded Medel, abandoned their intracochlear implant and developed a round window single channel device called the Vienna extracochlear implant. And Bill House then broke with the scientists and decided that he would put the electrode inside the ear. And he put a single electrode inside the cochlea, and he implanted a lot of people and began implanting children. And his device was commercialized by the 3M company in 1970. So Graeme CLARK was not really the first person to do a cochlear implant, but he really took it to another stage because he developed a device with multi-electrodes. The first one had 10 electrodes, and it was coated in araldite. This is a picture of him with Ron Saunders, the first recipient in 1978. Everybody said he was crazy. It was dangerous to put the electrodes inside the ear, and would 10 electrodes be any better than the single electrode used by 3M? But there were three people who really did help Graeme Clark develop his cochlear implant. Importantly, there was a man called Paul Trainer, and he ran Nucleus, a cardiac pacemaker company, and he offered to help Graeme and to embed the implant in Sialastic, a lot better than Araldite. Then Jim Patrick designed the array with 22 electrodes, not like the 10 that there was originally there. And Peter Seligman designed a program for the speech processor. Originally, it was done on 4 months, but it's getting better and better now. So I met Graeme Clark when I was still in England, and he very kindly invited me to participate in the cochlear implant program in Australia. My family and I came to Australia in October 1983. We went to I was appointed at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. It hasn't changed that much, but this is what it looked like in 1982. So soon after I arrived in Australia, I was asked to go before a group of senior ENT surgeons in what was called the Toynbee Club and tell them what my ideas were with the chair now that I was appointed as the professor. And when I told them that I intended to cooperate with Graeme Clark and implant patients with his device, they were appalled. And they said the single channel device done by 3M is more suitable, and it provides lip reading, and that's all you can expect from a cochlear implant. So I went to my department at RPA, and Barry Scrivener was fantastic. He stood up for me. He said, no, we'll go ahead with this implant. It's just being commercialized by Nucleus, and we'll try it. So I got my permission to go ahead with the surgeries. Now this, I don't know if this will come out, but this is the first patient.
I'm going to make a telephone call.
That was me.
Have the cochlear implant. The idea is to show you how much you can understand using a telephone. Right.
Do you like the telephone? This was Susan.
Hello. Hello, Susan.
Sorry?
Is that Susan?
Oh, Susan, yes, this is Susan.
Okay, this is Bill
Who's
Gibson.
speaking?
This is Bill Gibson.
This is
Bill Gibson.
Bill Gibson.
That's it. I thought I'd ring you and ask you about your holiday.
About my holiday.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Every Easter.
That's it. Where did you go?
Oh, I went down to Park, the National Park. To walk about 2 kilometres from Woodford down to the beach. It was really nice. Really hot day, but
Did it rain?
rain. No, it didn't.
I went to Melbourne.
Pardon?
I went to Melbourne.
Oh, you went to Melbourne.
It rained.
It rained. It always rains in Melbourne, doesn't it? Did you have a good time down there?
It was good. For 3 days, it
Oh,
rained.
yeah.
Hmm.
Did you take your family with you?
Yes,
Oh, good.
my son
Your
and my
son?
daughter.
Pardon?
My son
Yes.
and my daughter.
And your daughter?
Yes, to Melbourne,
Yes.
and we stayed on a farm.
You stayed on a farm?
That's good. And my son
get?
3.
Oh,
But one rabbit had mixo.
oh, did they? Oh,
Well,
yeah.
one had mixo. 2 were good.
So you couldn't eat them.
We ate 2.
Oh.
Good. Will you be coming to the meeting next week?
Meeting next week. Yes. Is it on Friday?
That's it. 6 o'clock.
At 6 o'clock, is it?
That's good. I'll see you then.
Okay then.
Fine.
All right.
Thank you.
thanks
Bye.
for ringing.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
That was very, very good.
So that was amazing. That video went viral around the world because it was the first time a cochlear implant had shown that it was possible to follow speech. So Susan could understand what I was saying through her cochlear implant. She had no natural hearing. So after that, we went ahead and did 20 adults. And this is a picture of them. The guy at the back there didn't have a cochlear implant, but everybody else does, because that was me. And then in 1986, I began the children's program. So the nucleus, or Graeme CLARK's cochlear implant, became the world leader, and it accounted for 90% of all the cochlear implants used worldwide. I should have bought shares at this time, but didn't. Annoying. And now there are several very good programs also providing cochlear implants. There's Medel, Advanced Bionics, that works with Phonak, Neuralec, which is the French company, and Cochlear. And they're all using multi-channel electrodes, and they're all getting it to the stage where people can follow speech using these devices. So, who needs a cochlear implant? My rule of thumb is that if you put your deaf ear to the telephone and you can't hear the speech clearly enough to follow the conversation, that ear probably would do better with a cochlear implant. If you do that little test first, which you can do at home, then you have to do a more formal assessment, and you should go to the cochlear implant centers and get the audiologist to do a proper test regime on you. So we now have cochlear implant centers through NextSense throughout New South Wales, Canberra, and even in Darwin. So if you go there, the audiologist will do the tests and give you an idea whether the criteria for a cochlear implant is fulfilled. At that stage, you can then decide whether or not you want to go ahead with the cochlear implant. There's no obligation to have a cochlear implant. You can just go along and find out whether you're actually a candidate. All the assessments through NextSense are done using bulk billing. So it wouldn't cost any money, but it will take a couple of hours of your time, and you've got to get to the center. So the surgery. Well, the surgery is less daunting than it used to be. It now takes, this little picture up the top is one of the youngest kids that I did. And there's a picture of me putting the cochlear implant in down the below. The surgery now takes 1 to 2 hours, and that includes the testing after it's inserted to make sure the device is working properly. It can be done as a day stay in younger people, or an overnight stay, most people prefer in hospital. You don't have to stay there for too long. Now, it's a straightforward operation now, and it's done through a small incision behind the ear. So there's minimal discomfort. You don't have to have the hair shaved or anything like that. So it's not like a knee or a hip surgery. It's only minimum time in hospital, minimum discomfort. And I liken it more to cataract surgery. So if you can go through a knee operation, this would be a breeze. So we now have neck-sense surgeons in every major town in New South Wales and ACT that have been improved, and they offer excellence in both the public system and privately. So you should beware of sharks, because there are some surgeons that charge amazingly large gaps in their surgical fees. The neck surgeons do not charge gaps if you're privately insured, and also offer you the surgery in the public sector. So you don't have to go to a surgeon that's going to charge you a fortune. So when I began doing cochlear implants in the 1980s, it was felt that the sound of the cochlear implant was so different that people with hearing in the opposite ear would not be able to match the speech sounds. They found it annoying that you've got one form of speech coming in one ear and another form in the other ear. So the idea of single-sided, i.e. people that have only lost the hearing in one ear, to receive a cochlear implant has really only happened in the last 10 years. And this is because the advances in the sound processing has made it possible to blend the sounds from each ear. So using a single-sided implant can be very helpful if the ear is too deaf to benefit from a cochlear implant, from a hearing aid. So if the ear has been deafened after childhood, then a cochlear implant does restore hearing in crowded places, and it gives some indication of the sound source. The other advantage is that a cochlear implant can suppress tinnitus. There's about a 70% chance that the cochlear implant which actually stop the tinnitus while it's being worn. And what we found out over the last 10 years is that ears that are deafened due to Meniere's disease function extremely well with cochlear implants. This is because the nerve is not damaged in Meniere's disease. It's loss of the hair cells in the ear, and this is what the cochlear implant can replace. So with Meniere's disease surgery, you can have endolymphatic sac surgery, you can have gentamicin therapy to get rid of vestibular nerve section, or a labyrinthectomy. All these treatments stop the vertigo, but it doesn't help the hearing loss or the tinnitus. So we have now offered labyrinthectomy, that's to take out the labyrinth that's causing the attacks, and to do cochlear implant surgery at the same time. This was the first patient that I did, which was June 2012, and we switched her on the next month. She was quite elderly, and there was no choice because she was having drop attacks and she was going to fall over and hurt herself. So we did both a labyrinthectomy and cochlear implant surgery, and she was also given intensive physiotherapy. So the outcome was that she had no further attacks of vertigo. She had surprisingly good balance. She had better hearing because although she had quite good hearing in the opposite ear, now the Meniere's ear could hear properly. And she was quite pleased because she actually had less or virtually no tinnitus remaining. So that was the first one. I think this was one of the first ones done worldwide. Since then, a lot of people have had the same surgery. So labyrinthectomy and cochlear implants is now a recognized indication in people who have end-stage Meniere's, where the hearing's really poor, they've got bad tinnitus, and they can't hear much out of the ear, and they're still getting the attacks of vertigo. So what we've learned is that older people are helped as much as younger people. So if you've only been deaf in the ear for a few years, you do better. That bilateral implants can be very beneficial, but implants can also be used for single-sided deafness. And it can even be used for tinnitus in a totally deaf ear. So the outstanding cause of hearing loss, which does so well with a cochlear implant, happens to be Meniere's disease. So what's the future going to bring? Well, after losing the balance in one ear, a person can feel permanently wobbly, especially when they're tired or unable to use their sight for their balance. So even though the attacks of vertigo have ceased, they may still complain that they're wobbly. So we have three systems, this complicated little diagram. You have your eyes, which dominate in human beings to keep your balance. You have your ears to keep your balance, and you have your joints or proprioceptors. It's different in cats. In cats, their necks have got fantastic balance and they always land on their feet when you drop them. So this is a little diagram, one of my drawings, you'll be impressed. And here's a man steering the aircraft along, and he has a motor on each wing, and he can keep the aircraft nice and steady. If one of the motors is destroyed, or if there's been a labyrinthectomy in the human's case, then there'll be a tendency for the aircraft to veer towards the damaged side. And that's what happens. But the problem's even worse if the balance is reduced in both ears. So maybe they've got no balance in the many ears and also poor balance in the opposite ear. And if that's the case, you can only use your eyes for your balance. So the man's not looking unhappy now, and you'd be very unstable in the dark. And if you're walking along, you can get a thing called oscillopsia, when the ground seems to bob up and down in front of you. So this is quite a significant problem for people, even when the Meniere's disease has run its course, the attacks of vertigo no longer exist. So the future is possibly vestibular implants. And these are being trialed in Maastricht, which is in Holland, and in Geneva. And they're done by the Medel company, is actually the leader in this at the moment. And basically, you have a processor that connects to a little box, which each time you move your head in certain directions will stimulate the relevant parts of your balance organ. And then you have the other part of this to supply the cochlea and provide the cochlear implant. So they're looking at having a single implant, which will do both vestibular help and also help the cochlea to hear. Now, at the moment, the trials are only being considered for bilateral labyrinthine failure. They're not doing it if it's only one ear, and they're people that are pretty desperate. But obviously, they have to choose the worst people before they dare to start on people who have, say, only the wobbliness after a labyrinthectomy. So I always end my little talks by a duck that's going to get rid of something. And my great hope that one day we'll be able to get rid of Meniere's disease. And whether we use cochlear implants or vestibular implants, or whether we find a better way of treating Meniere's before it gets so desperate, I'm not sure. But I'm sure there's a future, and research is going on at Macquarie University and soon to start again at the University of Sydney, as well as worldwide. So let's hope they can help the duck to get rid of Meniere's disease. Thank you.
Excuse me. Oh, dear. Sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Gibson. That was just amazing.
Oh, yeah.
You've
It's
told...
bad when I'm so old, I know all the history.
Yeah. It was brilliant. The clip was fantastic. the conversation you
Yeah,
had with the lady. That was fantastic.
that went viral.
Did it?
Yeah. And that's really what it really helped Nucleus become the established implant around the world. And it had the lead for about 10 years, the Australian one, but now there's all these rivals being developed.
I'll ask the first question. So who would not be eligible for a cochlear implant, even if they had hearing loss in one ear?
It need only be hearing loss in one ear, but the ear must be sufficiently deafened that you can't really hear speech on a telephone, even if you increase the amplification on the telephone. So my little rule of thumb just starts things off, but you do have to have a proper assessment of the cochlear implant centres around the place. And they will let you know whether you're actually truly a candidate or not. But Menias has been helped so much by cochlear implants. It's amazing. It's one of the best causes of deafness, well, worst causes of deafness, but one of the best things to put a cochlear implant into.
So, Anne, you asked another question. What happens if you don't have the labyrinth removed?
Well, the trouble is that Menias disease does tend to destroy the labyrinth in the long run anyway. So even if you have no surgery, by the time the disease becomes burnt out or the attacks are no longer very severe, usually a lot of the balance has been lost in the affected ear.
Anthony asks, I've just been approved for a labyrinthectomy and a cochlear implant just last week.
Very good.
There you go.
Let's hope it works as well as it usually works very well.
Yes. And Heather says, thank you for a wonderful talk. On a slight tangent, in your talk last year, you mentioned that the Zostavac for herpes was worth getting for people with MD. I understand that the vac has now changed and is no longer a live vaccine. Does this make any difference?
Oh, that might be safer, yeah. They're still a bit nervous about giving it to people over 70, I think, just in case they react badly to it. But we're now beginning to think cytomegalic virus is actually one of the, was probably more likely to be the cause than the herpes virus. But this is the source of research at the moment.
Thank you. Anthony said, would having labyrinthectomy surgery completely destroy your hearing, or is there a chance you may still have some of your existing hearing available after it?
Labyrinthectomy does completely destroy the hearing in the ear. Vestibular nerve section, which Rob Eisenberg probably was talking about, that doesn't destroy the hearing. You can keep your hearing and get rid of the balance part of the ear.
Right. Thank you very much. And Monica Burns says, thank you so very much, Professor. As always, your talks are so informative. I loved learning the history too. Such brilliance within your ranks.
Thanks, Monica.
And they're all the questions today. Thank you.
There you are.
Oh, no, there's a couple more coming up. Scott says, I'm desperate to stop the vertigo attacks. I'm bilateral. I'm terrified of making things worse, especially my balance. What would you recommend?
Well, is the hearing still satisfactory or not? Can they say that when you've got bilateral Meniere's disease, your balance is hanging on a thread, because losing the balance on both sides is so bad. So I can understand why she's so nervous. Perhaps we have to wait for the Medell to come out with the vestibular implant. But if the hearing's poor, she shouldn't be worried about making the balance necessarily any worse by having a cochlear implant, because there's now very thin arrays that can be put into the ear that are very unlikely to make the balance worse. So she can still have the hearing check done, but we haven't got anything for the balance as yet, other than intensive physiotherapy, which definitely can help.
Thank you. And Anne says, do you recommend any particular brand?
No, well, Obviously, we went with the Australian one to begin with. It's more difficult now because there's so many good. There's 3 other very, very good implants. I still tend to favour the Cochlear one. My second runner is probably Medell, and then I go to Advanced Bionics, and then Neuralec will probably be my last one.
Thank you. Vicky says, can you have a labyrinthectomy and a cochlear implant before many ears is burnt out?
Yes, you may not want to. It depends how bad your Meniere's is. If you're having terrible attacks, then you're going to have, you probably do want to have some surgery. Yeah, but to begin, we usually think of doing the labyrinthectomy when things become desperate, or if they're having drop attacks where they could fall down, hurt themselves, fall in the street, break a hip, whatever, and then it gets very crucial to try and stop these drop attacks before people get seriously injured.
So Scott Pearson says, bad hearing getting worse.
His hearing's getting worse. Okay, well, he should go for an assessment because it's only his time. It won't cost him any money at one of the centres. And we can tell whether or not he's getting close to an implant. I should add, I'm feeling bad about this, that Selene also does cochlear implants. She favours the Medell device. And she's a very good, if you're in Bondi, I don't want to distract you, don't have to go to one of the next centres. She's just as good.
Thank you.
Thank you. And B Digital says, is there anything you would recommend for ear fullness? I have it constantly and it's often painful. I also have constant tinnitus.
Yeah, well, the ear fullness is one of the things that really can hang on in some people. We've tried all sorts of different things like putting tubes in the ear. I don't think that works. We've tried different medications, such as antihistamine type things. If there's any problem with the teeth or the eustachian tube, this will definitely make it worse. So a medical assessment's quite useful just to make sure there isn't anything that's aggravating it. And even temporomandibular joint dysfunction can sometimes make the fullness about 3 times worse than it really is. So it's worth making sure there's nothing aggravating it. But I sadly have to say, we still do not have a very good, if the fullness is purely due to Meniere's, we still do not have a good way of getting rid of it.
Thank you very much. Anne Lamb says, thank you for the presentation. I have labyrinthitis to one ear in 2012. I lost the hearing and my balance is poor. My head also feels funny. Is implant suitable? I'm 71 years old.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, that's all I have to say. Look, the oldest patient that has had a cochlear implant was 101. So, which is amazing. I did a guy at 96, I remember, but now they've done better than that. It depends on your general health. If you're a healthy person, there's no problem having a cochlear implant. The surgery isn't that daunting. It's not like having your knee done or your hip done, which are pretty awful, I believe. This is a walk in the park compared with those operations.
Thank you, Professor. There are 2 more comments here that I'll raise with you and then hand back to Anne. Anthony says, have we seen any new technology on the external side of the cochlea, as in making it smaller?
Yeah. Well, they've got the Canzo device and the little one that just goes under at the back with nothing in the ear. So if you've got hair, you've got to have the hair down here. Ladies are always... You can have a device which is completely hidden. I actually wanted to call it Nikki, not Canzo. Cochlear said it should be called Canzo because it's Japanese and they're trying to get into the Japanese market. But Nikki, nearly invisible cochlear implant.
And
now they have actually brought out one that's totally implanted. To me, that's horrifying, because in 3 years' time, there'll be a better one. And what do? Have another surgery and put the latest one in. At least if it's the Kanso or the Nikki or whatever, which is hidden, you can change the processor. You don't have to have another operation. So fully invisible cochlear implants, I think, is a bit silly, because you'd end up with the same technology 20 years away when things are better.
Richard says, thank you. I have 2 CIs and I have terrible balance. What should I do?
Yeah. He wants to get this vestibular implant, doesn't he? So at the moment, only physio. But one day, and Cochlear's actually doing a bit of work on it, but they seem to have gone a bit blank recently. There will be a vestibular implant for people like this poor chap, because it's really a bad handicap, losing balance in both ears. Anytime you shut your eyes, your balance is gone.
Yes, yes.
Richard actually has his hand up, Lynn.
Right. Richard, would you like to speak next? And then there's just 2 more questions.
No.
Question as to, what options can he see for me? And he's gone, well, there is testing. Cochlear's testing's not going very well, which is the testing I was in before. But he said that Medell's doing something that's likely to be quite helpful to a lot of people. I can't say any more.
So who has
He's
a poor,
right in touch.
who's got the poor result with the cochlear implant, yourself or a friend? Oh,
Gone. Doesn't matter.
okay, because the Medel is very good. I'm not sure that it's necessarily better than the Cochlear one, but anyway.
So Vicky says, if you have many ears and you have an implant, can you still have an episode of ear fullness?
Yeah, yes. And we actually have got people who have had cochlear implants who have many ears and haven't had labyrinthectomy, who've actually had some episodes of vertigo. So we think you can still get the endolymphatic hydrops in the ear, even with a cochlear implant present. So just having the cochlear implant alone gives you your hearing, but it shouldn't really change your balance or make or get rid of the attacks necessarily.
Thank you. Richard does have 2 CIs, so he was probably talking about himself.
So was it due to Meniere's that he lost his hearing? Because Meniere's people usually do very, very well. I'm a bit disappointed, but it's more difficult as you get older. Maybe sometimes the results are not quite so stunning. If you've had middle ear problems like mastoid surgery or nasty middle ear infections, the implant sometimes doesn't work particularly well. So if you've got a big history of middle ear problems or mastoid problems, that's actually not so good as having just Meniere's.
Right. And how long would the rehab take, says Anne?
What, to get your balance
in general, to be able to hear as well with one ear and the balance be okay?
The rehab's not too bad at all. Maybe if you've only just lost the hearing in the ear, we're probably looking at 1 to 2 months. But we always see that people, they have to come in on a regular basis to have everything checked. So they have a checkup every 6 months or a year for the rest of their lives, just to make sure everything's working properly.
Wow.
But the actual getting used to it, if it's Meniere's, is quite quick.
And so Richard has chronic Meniere's and has ongoing issues that have been going on for years. And Anne Elias asks, if you've had gentamicin in the ear, would the implant be a problem?
No, not at all. No, that would probably be the safest. It's even safer than the labyrinthectomy. Yeah.
And if you've had a device for 10 years, can you get an updated version?
Yes. Yes, you can. We've done that on that lady that I showed. Oh, well, actually not so much Sue. She's had the second ear done now, so she's got hearing on both sides. But I think the fourth implant that was ever done with Graeme's group came to Sydney, and I remember taking her implant out and giving her the latest one. There's a lot of people that, once it's in, you can take it out and put, if there's a much better implant, put that one in. But whether people want the question is how much gain is there? You don't want another surgery if it's only minimal gain.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's